Well, welcome to Palestra Forum, Randall. The theme of the event today in San Salvador is layers of the earth, and
Mm-hmm.
so I mean El Salvador. It's a land of volcanoes. I sent a couple notes over, about Ilopango eruption, which was pretty impactful.
Very
Shot up a
so,
ton
very
of
much so. Yeah.
ash, and I mean any building project here in San Salvador, El Salvador, anything really west, specifically west of the Lake Ilopango, is covered. Has meters and meters, even hundreds of meters of volcanic ash in some places, and I think it shaped the country's agriculture, it shaped the development, and a lot of things, and it's something where I feel like you would kind of have a unique perspective, just volcanoes in El Salvador, or even
Mm-hmm.
around the Americas, and such. But yes.
Well, we know volcanoes have, and are finding out more and more all the time, the role that volcanoes have played in global change, climate change.
Hmm.
And that eruption, let's see, what's the actual year of that eruption? I know it was around 536 AD. Is that the actual year now that the eruption has been pinpointed to?
The estimates are in the range of like 2 or 3 years, 536,
Yeah,
537.
right in there.
Hmm.
Well, from roughly 536 AD to about 544 to 546, 8 to 10 years, there appears to have been a major slowdown in, for example, forest growth in the northern hemisphere. Dendrochronologists who study tree rings have noticed that growth almost came to a screeching halt for about a decade, and it's now the data suggests that somewhere right in that window of about 536 AD was possibly the coldest year of the last 2,000 years. If that's true, then it really does imply that volcanic eruptions can have a much greater influence or effect on the environment and long lasting. Although there's interesting evidence to suggest that there may have actually also been one or two cosmic impacts. Let's go on to a share screen, and I'm going to show you. Such a time came in the 6th century AD. That's our 536 event right there. The Dark Ages settled heavily over Europe. Rome had been beaten back from its empire. Art and science stagnated. Even the sun turned its back. Quote, "We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon, to feel the mighty vigor of the sun's heat, wasted into feebleness," Italian historian Flavius Cassiodorus wrote at the time. "We have summer without heat. The crops have been chilled by north winds, and the rain is denied." When we turn to the ancient legacy, that's when we start getting into some really interesting stuff. Because universally, oftentimes, fireballs, asteroids, comets, meteors, etc., have been depicted as cosmic serpents and dragons. Theatrum cometicum, traditional European depiction of a comet as a cosmic serpent. I think the evidence shows that we have had a period of a couple of centuries where we've had milder climate change and environmental change than some of the things that our ancestors experienced in the past.
Hmm.
And we're looking at the legacy of civilization now, and what we seem to be observing is repeated aborted attempts to create civilization. We can just start listing the civilizations you can think of, from Egypt to Sumeria to the Indus Valley to what was going on in the Amazon. Whatever happened there, it came to an end, and this vast complex of civilization that was in the Amazon got pretty much consumed by the jungles.
Hmm.
And what we actually see, I think, is over and over again attempts to create civilizations. And the old models is that, well, it was something internal. People got lazy, or it was war, or, they spent too much time on their iPhones, or whatever it was. And as a result, they weren't paying attention to the bigger picture. There was this tendency to want to avoid what was called climate determinism, because it complicated everything to think, well, wait a second, well, maybe the climate had a little bit of influence, but mostly it was these internal factors. The term would be internecine. these internecine factors, right? And but the evidence now is pretty much overwhelming that, number one, we now understand that the planet that we live on has been much more dynamic in its past than we have assumed, and the larger cosmic environment is not just an empty space where nothing happens. Things happen in the greater cosmic environment. In fact, the way I express it is that we have to start thinking in terms of our planet is part of a cosmic ecological system. And all of these factors play into what's happening down here below. And if we ignore all of that, we set ourselves up for trouble. Okay, so there's a southwest to northeast transect through the basin of Cabinet Gorge Reservoir. The water level is at 4,200 feet above sea level, which I'm showing right here.
Yeah.
So in the next one, I'm showing a major, happens to be the skyline of Atlanta. This is the water that was flowing. The water here was over 2,000 feet deep. And how do we know it? Well, we can trace the shorelines at that 4,200 feet above sea level. So there's the skyline of Atlanta, and then. So again, how do you even conceive of a flow of water like this? Well, it's almost impossible. And yet, basically, this is the dividing line between history and prehistory.
It's a phenomenal woodwork. This deluge figuier. It really puts into kind of pictures artistically, kind of what you're.
Yes.
I mean, what you're describing. It's incredible. I mean, because you make the point. I mean, how could anyone imagine, this water pulsing, spinning, cutting into things? I mean, water cutting something is just something that no one thinks of.
I mean, I point this out. Look, the old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And we can talk thousands of words, but then seeing one picture like that, a big rock sitting there with these little tiny people on it, right? You go, wow. But as much of an advance there is from just hearing words to seeing pictures, when you get out into the landscapes themselves and begin to see this firsthand. Like, we've gone out and taken 2-week tours where we're 2 weeks moving over thousands of miles and realizing everything we're seeing is part of the same gigantic events. And we still have only seen a small part of it.
Yeah.
Then that conveys to people that finally it begins to sink in. So, Hamlet's Mill, one of my favorite all-time books, the task then was to discover from a remote past an utterly lost science, linked to an equally lost culture. This was written in 1969. These people were, major academic scholars, deeply educated scholars who'd been reading ancient history, came to the conclusion that there was an equally lost culture, one in which anthropologists have seen only alliterative primitive man. Why am I putting that there? Because I would suggest that they were onto something back then, and we now can have an idea of what it is. From the Vedic traditions, we have Indra wielding the Vajra, which was the instrument of universal power wielded by the gods in the Vedic traditions of India. And you see, he's got in his right hand here, he's holding the Vajra, right? And then it comes down through Zoroastrianism, Mithraism. It finds its way into Greece. And here we have Zeus holding the Vajra, a spiral form thunderbolt generator. Look at the spiral here form of the Vajra. That's your vortex. And here's the Vajra thunderstorm generator, I call it, because it seems to have all the components. And the cylinder is down the middle. Here's your control valves on the end. Here's your spherical swirl chamber. And then you've got this, and we will not get into that today because it'd be way too much, but I'll just point this out. What you see here is the chalice, which is the symbol, the imagery behind the Holy Grail. And if you take a deep dive into the Holy Grail, which I've given several lectures, but the really in-depth lecture I've never given publicly. But basically, I break down the myth of the Holy Grail and show that behind it is almost certainly symbolism representing a lost technology, and it's the same technology as the thunderstorm generator. So, Michael, we're going to be presenting this discussion you and I are having at a conference down there where you are in El Salvador. Well, tell me and whoever else is listening and whoever I might be sharing this with really more about what you're doing there and what's happening, because what you've told me so far is really interesting and intriguing, and I want to know more specifically about what's evolving there in El Salvador and what your part of it is and what this conference is about.
Absolutely. I mean, El Salvador over the past 5 years, 6 years, has undergone what I think, at least in my lifetime, 32, has been probably the most transformative change, positive change for a country. I moved here to El Salvador about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And El Salvador, I think for a lot of Americans, was known as a place of violence, and young people growing up here didn't have many opportunities. They would, move to other countries to work. And so El Salvador right now, it's the safest country in the Western Hemisphere, lowest homicide rate, and there's just more optimism, I think, and like for for positive stories like in the world, I think it's a great one. And so that's a bit about kind of El Salvador and kind of the broader scene. As far as Palestra and kind of what I'm working on and what we're the research we're doing down here. Right now, we actually have an agreement with the Ministry of Culture to perform archaeological research using LiDAR and unmanned aerial systems to map both existing sites to kind of draw kind of new conclusions, or just to provide resources to the ministry for a better way of looking at the sites, and then all other sites that are maybe unknown or sort of just coming into view. And so it's pretty exciting work. We are already finding things, and it's a great place to work with everything kind of going on here.
So, the things you're finding, does that link back to Mayan culture or
No,
earlier than that? Olmecs? Were the Olmecs present there?
it's primarily Maya era
Uh huh.
sites, and there's a lot of people, even in El Salvador growing up here, didn't really know too much about the sites. Mexico and Guatemala have a higher density
Mm-hmm.
of these sites, sort of along the same style, same era. But what we're noticing is there's actually like others closer to the sea, closer to the coastline, even some in the ocean that we haven't gotten to take a look at yet. So that's something like that's why I asked a little bit about the submersibles, because it's sort of a maybe a dream over in the future to kind of take a look at that. But
Well, that's kind of a fantasy of mine. Yeah, I kind of what I know about El Salvador. I mean, it's kind of like what you described, and I do definitely remember. I older than you, so I remember very clearly the '80s and
yeah,
the violence, the incredible violence. But
Civil
El
War,
Salvador got swept up in big power politics and kind of became a pawn of the Cold War,
right?
and I think that's what caused this damage that took decades to work out.
Yeah, the safety is really something that's it can't be really be overstated. It makes the
Hmm.
research possible. It makes the
Yeah.
archaeological research possible because we're going to places, in the middle of the forest, and those were places that nobody else could go
Hmm.
when times were more were more difficult. So and also it's the it's the places where I think the stories, um, where people who are living those areas didn't feel like they had their own kind of um, history or their own story, and so to
Hmm.
be able to kind of do more cultural research and sort of bring more information into the people of El Salvador's mind more,
Hmm.
um, it's a privilege really that I think we have.
I think you did use the word. I think it's a key word. I mean, freedom.
Yeah.
There's more freedom, and when you get freed and people are free, then they want to achieve, they want to accomplish, they want to
Hmm.
create and build. And then when
Absolutely.
you have a society that's oriented around that philosophy of freedom, they are just naturally going to become, more productive. I think the two go hand in hand. I think freedom
Hmm.
and prosperity go two sides of the same coin.